DFS. It is Friday, December 23rd here in Draft Shark Studios in Rochester, New York. Welcome to our Week 16 DFS show. I'm your host, Matt Schauf. With me, as always, is Jared Smola. Jared, second straight week where we're combining FanDuel and DraftKings into one show. We will be back after this for the live drafting show on both Underdog and Sleeper. This is an interesting DFS main slate this week because it's on Saturday instead of Sunday, obviously because of Christmas. It's leaving 6 games out of it. We, of course, had Jaguars-Jets last night. We've got Raiders-Steelers on Saturday night. Sunday, we've got Packers-Dolphins, Broncos-Rams, Bucks-Cardinals. Monday night, Chargers against Nick Foles. So that's 12 missing teams. That matches what we would get in a 6-team bye week.
Yeah, and then, the weather knocks some games out as far as stacking up passing games. There are games with just crappy offenses that I think you don't want a whole lot to do with. So it feels like a tight slate. I think ownership's going to be pretty condensed. I think it's also a slate where, to me, there are 3 or 4 guys that have massive upside. And my thing is I want to try to get 2 of those guys in a lot of my lineups and then kind of, see what I can fit around them.
We will get to who those guys are and exactly what positions we're talking about. But we'll start with quarterback for cash. And on DraftKings, I think Geno Smith jumps out to me at $5,800. It's going to be very cold for this game, but it sits just a half point short of the week's highest game total by the Vegas numbers. The wind doesn't look like it'll be a factor. So I'm going to lean toward trusting the passing game here. Chiefs are favored by 10, so it's a great spot to increase the passing volume for the Seahawks. Chiefs opponents have the 5th highest pass rate over expected for the season. Kenneth Walker is hurt. He's questionable after not practicing all week. Geno leads the league in completion rate. So, good quarterback playing well, even though he doesn't have Tyler Lockett. It's a good spot for upside. I think he's a fairly easy cash play at $5,800.
So I love Geno. He's my main target in tournaments. I'm actually going to play Gardner Minshew in cash though for the $1,000 savings. For $4,800 quarterback, I'll consider most $4,800 quarterbacks, and this is a NFL caliber quarterback. Maybe he's not starter level, but he's a good backup. I think in this situation behind one of the best O-lines in the league with these weapons. We saw Gardner Minshew start 2 games last year for the Eagles, and he threw 2 touchdowns in both of those games. Neither had AJ Brown. The second one, they pulled starters. Devonta Smith only played a quarter of the snaps in that game. So, and we don't have to worry about weather in this game. It's in Dallas. And as we've talked about on yesterday's show, Dallas's pass defense has not been as strong lately. They're missing a couple of their corners. They're just 15th in Football Outsiders pass defense DVOA over the past 5 weeks now. So, Minshew, even versus Geno Smith, an extra $1,000, that is what lets you get in 2 of these high price guys we're going to talk about.
Yes, I agree with that, and I won't fight playing Gardner Minshew. And quite possibly once I go to build it, maybe that $1,000 will be worth it for going down to Minshew. Daniel Jones also in play at $5,600 if you want to avoid the cold with Geno Smith, and you don't want to go all the way down to Gardner Minshew at $4,800. On FanDuel, Geno Smith does not stand out as a value as much. He's 4th in our dollars per point there, behind the 2 9K quarterbacks and Justin Fields. Fields just $200 more in salary than Geno here. And, conditions aren't going to be great for football in Chicago, but they are at least conditions that should favor running over passing. So I think that keeps the floor there for Justin Fields. I am cool with him there. I'm still cool with Geno Smith, and I'm still cool with $7,400 Daniel Jones, but Gardner Minshew might factor in there as well.
Yeah, it's Fields for me on FanDuel. I just think that's too cheap a price tag. I know the weather's not going to be great. The matchup isn't great, but like you said, the weather matters less for Fields. He has 21 plus FanDuel points in 7 straight games now. And we did get back to, he had 10 designed runs last week. We talked about his design runs being down the prior game because of the shoulder injury, but he was back to a full go there. So I just think his floor for cash, maybe it's not a ceiling game for Fields, but I don't think he's going to kill you at $7,800.
And for what it's worth, among the rushing lines available on the DraftKings Sportsbook right now, which does not include Derrick Henry, there's no line for him there right now. But among those that are there, which is for most games, Justin Fields is 4th among all players in rushing yards, behind only Josh Jacobs, Christian McCaffrey, and Dalvin Cook. So wow. Vegas is not too worried about him being limited.
That's good to hear.
On the GPP side, I think Minshew is going to be popular on both sites for this particular format. And for me, that makes him a fade. What about you?
I'm going to fade him too. And I get why he's popular because, again, there are these high price dubs we want to fit this week, and Minshew lets you get those in. But as much as I like him for cash, I don't see him putting up like 28 DraftKings points, which I still think you're probably going to need from your quarterback to win, even if he's as cheap as Minshew is.
Now, of course, we have a slate wrecker, at least one at running back. So if that's the guy that you need to have, maybe you don't need to have a 30-point quarterback. And I wouldn't call him a full fade because of the salary space that he gives you and where he lets you differentiate everywhere else. So it's somebody that I would fade a bit, still probably get a little bit just to get that roster flexibility.
Yeah, if I was a guy who makes 50 plus lineups, I would have some Minshew, but I usually make 3 or 4, and I don't think I'm going to have a Minshew team in tournaments.
I agree with that. And I would say looking at the ownership too, give me Jared Goff at a quarter of the ownership of Gardner Minshew in a large field tournament. Geno Smith is about half of Gardner Minshew's current projection for ownership. Dak Prescott is about half the ownership in that same matchup. So you could play Dak Prescott at a much lower ownership rate. I mean, obviously the salary's higher, but I doubt that many people would say that Gardner Minshew beats Dak Prescott on either floor or ceiling for fantasy production. You can also put in the Eagles pass catchers that the Gardner Minshew lineups will have here. Obviously not all of them, but grab one of those guys, or you could pair him with Miles Sanders and get further leverage off of the Gardner Minshew lineups because Miles Sanders is currently projected for lower ownership than Gardner Minshew on both of these sites.
Yeah, Sanders is one of my favorite tournament plays at running back for that reason. Just hoping, the Eagles go run heavy. Jalen Hurts has been this team's top goal line back. So with him out of the picture, like that work should now go to Sanders. So I think you can argue that no Jalen Hurts is actually good news for Miles Sanders fantasy value. And, that's not reflected in the ownership projections at this point. So I definitely like that idea. Again, I'm really focusing on the Seahawks Chiefs game for tournaments, both sides of it. The Seahawks side is much cheaper. You can fit in a lot more around it. But I think the Mahomes, Juju Smith-Schuster, if you just look at our dollars per point rankings, you'll just find a lot of Seahawks and Chiefs guys up there. DK Metcalf, Marquise Goodwin, Noah Fant, Juju Smith-Schuster is up there. Travis Kelce, even at his price tag, is in the top 8 or so tight end. So I just think that game is a natural stack, and it actually looks like the Giants Vikings game is attracting as much tournament attention, if not more. And I would much rather play this Chiefs Seahawks game, especially at the price tags on these guys.
I think it's understandable to get that kind of attention given the cold temps for that Kansas City game. There's bad weather all over the place. So here you get already an upside matchup because of how bad the Vikings defense has been, and an indoor matchup, at least as important this week.
Yeah, the Chiefs Seahawks game is supposed to be cold, but not very windy. So I don't think the weather is going to have much of an impact on that game. I'm trying to figure out what to do with Daniel Jones, though, because I do like him in this spot at the price tag, but he's projected to be one of, if not the highest owned quarterback. So that feels like a bad tournament play to play chalky Daniel Jones.
I agree, because I think he's a good bet for floor this week, but he's not a good ceiling bet. They have a garbage passing game. I mean, a good day for him is 230 yards with 2 touchdowns. And even if he runs for 70 and a score, that's not a tournament winning score. I mean, obviously that's a terrific score and you wouldn't complain if you get it, but the ceiling for Daniel Jones just doesn't match the other guys that you could put at that position.
Yeah, I was looking through his DraftKings totals this morning, and most of his games are 18 to 20 DraftKings points. He does have a 32-pointer and a 30-pointer because he scored rushing touchdowns in those games, and I think one of them he went over 300 yards passing. So it's in the range, but just weighing the chances he hits 26 to 30 points versus the ownership, I don't really love it for Jones in tournaments.
Yeah, that's the thing. It's probably the wrong way for me to state it, that he doesn't have the ceiling, because he has hit 30 a couple of times, but doesn't have as much ceiling potential as Patrick Mahomes or probably Geno Smith, I think.
Agreed.
All right, on to running back for cash. And obviously the big first question is Derrick Henry. He leads our DK dollars per point by a decent margin, despite having an $8,600 salary, second highest at the position, $200 behind Christian McCaffrey. But I mean, we all know why he's up there. 4 straight games against the Texans at over 210 yards rushing and 2+ touchdowns. Last time, 32 carries, 6.8 yards per rush in the first meeting this year with Malik Willis at quarterback. So they go in there already having been dominated 3 straight times by Derrick Henry. with a rookie at quarterback. They know it's coming and they're still like, he can't do anything. He's so big.
Yeah, I'm playing Henry in cash. I actually think there are paths to him underwhelming, so which we can get into if you want. I think he's a pretty good tournament fade, actually. But I'm playing Henry and Christian McCaffrey in cash, and that's kind of why I'm playing Gardner Minshew to get those two guys. And just, I mean, Henry, I think, is a lock for 20 plus carries if he doesn't get hurt in this game, but probably a good bet for 25 plus carries. He also has 2+ catches in 6 straight games now. Now, maybe that streak is snapped with Malik Willis under center. We'll see. But like the Titans are clearly looking to get him the ball, and they're designing screenplays for him and stuff to get him the ball in the passing game. And then Christian McCaffrey, 19 carries and 7 targets over his last 3 games. He has 28 plus DraftKings points in all 3 of those games. The matchup isn't great for him against Washington, but I'll take my chances on a guy of McCaffrey's talent level getting 20 to 25 touches.
Yeah, he's as matchup proof as any running back is because he's a running back and a slot receiver. So I'm not worried about the matchup for him. Give me the paths to Derrick Henry underwhelming in this matchup.
Yeah, well, it's the fact that Malik Willis is under center, and maybe they just won't sustain drives. I mean, their implied total dropped quite a bit with the Tannehill to Malik Willis news. The Titans are only implied for 19.5 points, against a Texans defense. And that's the other argument here, is that Houston's defense, at least by like DVOA, has been better lately. I think they're in the top 10 in rush defense DVOA over the last 5 weeks. It's not a matchup I'm scared of, but they're definitely playing better than they were when these teams first, met back in week 8. And like at the price tag and ownership of Henry, you need him to go for probably 2 touchdowns, honestly. Like 150 yards and a touchdown. I'm not sure that's going to be enough to win a tournament this week at his price tag and ownership.
Yeah, that's the argument against him. It's not, I'm worried that he might not do that well this week. He's going to do very well, probably, as long as he's healthy. Obviously, there's always the question of if a guy gets dinged up, and the more you carry the ball, the better chance there is that you get dinged up. So, that's the thing, is we need so much from him in this one, because of how many teams are going to have him in a tournament. He has to be the guy that you can't not have to pay off at that ownership rate. So you're basically just, betting on the chance that he's not the week breaker in that game. And, it's always more likely that a guy doesn't completely dominate than that he does.
Exactly. I think he's a good bet for 20 plus points, which is why we play him in cash. But I think it's definitely possible that he doesn't get to like 30, which I think he needs to do for tournaments.
Jerick McKinnon is disturbingly comfortable to play at $5,900 on DraftKings this week. And he sits right behind Derrick Henry in our dollars per point on DK. And it's a nice pairing because you're like, I got to try to fit Derrick Henry. How am I going to, there's a $5,900 running back who plays for the Chiefs and is facing the Seahawks this week. That's nice.
Yep. McKinnon's my third guy in for DraftKings cash games. He's 7th among running backs in expected PPR points over the last 3 weeks. He's getting decent ball carrying volume, then awesome work in the passing game, a lot of work, near the goal line. So, it feels a bit point chasey to play McKinnon after his 2 massive games, but the usage backs up the production he's had lately.
Yeah, I mean, there is definitely some point chasing to it, but he is still south of $6K in salary. He has been getting a lot of targets lately, even with guys getting healthy. And it's just 2 games, 17 targets over the past 2 games, but there have been other 8 target games mixed in, a 6 target game against the Rams. So there's enough to justify it, I think.
For sure, yeah. On FanDuel, it's really not possible to play McCaffrey and Derrick Henry on FanDuel, at least not that I've been able to figure out when I was messing with lineups this morning. So I think you have to pick one of those guys. I like Tony Pollard as a play on FanDuel at $7,700. Even with Zeke back the last 5 games and then basically splitting work down the middle, Pollard is averaging 14.8 carries and 4.2 targets per game. Dallas now pretty comfortable home favorites against the Eagles. I do think, they'll be able to get Pollard his 15 to 20 touches. So I like him as a cash play on FanDuel.
And looking at Derrick Henry versus Christian McCaffrey, I agree. You probably have to decide between them more here. If you look at the FanDuel dollars per point, Christian McCaffrey's ahead because he's $400 less expensive on here. To me, Derrick Henry's still the one that I'm scared to not play between them, especially with half point per reception. We've got McCaffrey going up against a better defense. I talked about him being matchup proof, but if I have to bet on one team limiting scoring, I think Washington is better equipped to limit scoring than Houston is. So if we're splitting hairs here, I'm a little more scared to leave Derrick Henry out of my cash lineup building than I am Christian McCaffrey.
Yeah, I'm with you there. I would start with Henry in my cash lineup, but like if I got to the end and I needed the extra $400, I would have no issue at all dropping down to McCaffrey.
I agree with that. In addition to Tony Pollard, who I also have down, Miles Sanders, $7,100, attractive here on FanDuel. I think he should be a safer bet for carries than usual. As you alluded to earlier, he is averaging a solid 15.4 per game for the season. First meeting with Dallas, he had 18, even with Jalen Hurts in there. That was his third most of the season. So I would expect that they'll run the ball plenty in this one. I'm sure we'll get more Boston Scott and Kenneth Gainwell involved, but I don't think that it will come so much at the expense of Sanders as it will replacing the carries that Jalen Hurts would have had in this game with more true running plays as opposed to quarterback running plays. Miles Sanders, I think, has multiple score potential in any game, especially any game that does not include their number one goal line back, as you mentioned earlier.
Yeah, for sure. I think Sanders in play for cash on FanDuel. Love him for tournaments on both sites. He's projected for 8% ownership on DraftKings at $6,200, 10% ownership on FanDuel. As I said, Jalen Hurts has accounted for 44% of the Eagles' carries inside the 10-yard line, 56% of the carries inside the 5-yard line so far this season. So I think, Sanders probably gains touchdown upside with Hurts out.
On the tournament side, what are you doing with Derrick Henry? Is he more of a fade or are you going ahead and plowing away?
Yeah, I'm not gonna full fade him, but he's not gonna be in like all my lineups. I think playing McCaffrey instead of him at slightly lower ownership makes some sense. My favorite higher priced running back in tournaments though is Dalvin Cook. He gives you some leverage off Kirk Cousins, who's going to be popular. Justin Jefferson going to be popular. I'm going to definitely have some Jefferson in lineups too. But it's a better matchup for Cook than it is for Minnesota's passing game. The Giants are dead last in Football Outsiders run defense DVOA over the last 5 weeks. They're allowing 5.3 yards per carry to running backs over that span. And as we've been saying for a while, Cook has one of the best roles among running backs in fantasy football in terms of snap rate and touches. He's been getting 20 plus opportunities in most of these games. So I think it's a great spot for Dalvin Cook, and he is coming in at just at least 17% projected on DraftKings, so not super sneaky, but just 11% on FanDuel.
Like that, because I like him better on FanDuel than DraftKings anyway. I think J.K. Dobbins is also attractive on FanDuel. $7K, I think he's not cheap enough to be obvious, and he's not expensive enough to be overpriced. Just kind of in a sneaky range with Miles Sanders. The two of them are actually tied for 8th in projected ownership on FanDuel by our numbers right now in the lineup generator. So I like that he's not going to be too highly owned. I love the matchup with Atlanta. He's already gone over 100 yards each of the past 2 weeks. There's, some risk that he doesn't find the end zone. It's not a good offense, and he's only had the 1 carry inside the 10-yard line in his 2 games back. But there's also, I think, a 2 touchdown ceiling against this team in a game that it should feature running the entire time.
For sure. Last DraftKings running back play for tournaments, DeAndre Swift. And, you mentioned on yesterday's preview pod how he's basically seeing a very similar role to Jerick McKinnon at this point. Swift is $400 cheaper than McKinnon on DraftKings. Swift's $5,500. He's projected for half the ownership of Jerick McKinnon, 14% for McKinnon, 7% for DeAndre Swift. So to me, that's just a nice pivot in tournaments, just getting that slight salary discount and a guy who's going to be much less owned. But I still think similar upside. Like I know McKinnon the past 2 weeks has had the massive games, but I still think their ceilings are pretty similar.
Yeah, I have the exact same thing down here. I think the difference here is Jerick McKinnon plays in a much better offense. DeAndre Swift is a better player, and the Lions offense is pretty good at this point too. So yeah, I agree. A pretty similar player in terms of floor versus ceiling at a cheaper price and much lower ownership this week. I think Dobbins is a little bit less attractive on DraftKings because he has to hit the 100-yard bonus to make it there. But there's plenty of upside to hit the 100-yard bonus. He's even sneakier on here at single-digit ownership. So he's worth considering, not necessarily a spotlight play.
Yep, definitely in my player pool for tournaments, Dobbins is.
Wide receiver for cash. Can you get Justin Jefferson at $9,300 into the same lineup with Derrick Henry and Christian McCaffrey?
No. You can play 2 of the 3, which I think is the big decision. I tend to lean towards the running backs in cash. But I mean, Jefferson's an awesome play. I have no issue with him in cash games. And I definitely think you should get some exposure to him in tournaments as well.
He tops our dollars per point on both sites this week, despite being on the high end salary. And he's that high end guy in salary, in production, and projected ownership, which leads the position here as well. Plenty of low salary options around him, though, if you are looking to play Jefferson along with one of those high priced running backs. My favorite, of course, is Marquise Goodwin at 4,300 across formats on DraftKings this week. So he's basically replacing Tyler Lockett this week. Lockett's tied for 17th among wide receivers in targets for the season. Seahawks just 12th in reception share for their wide receivers in the league, which I was surprised by. I was expecting that number to be a little higher. But I think that points to the concentration of wide receiver targets within that position to DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett. Obviously, Marquise Goodwin is not close to the same level as Tyler Lockett, but it speaks to the opportunity heading his way this week. I already talked about the matchup favoring passing here. And, Marquise Goodwin's not a terrific player, but he has managed to stay in the league for 9 years. He's averaging 14.3 yards per catch this year at age 32. So he's still a speedster. Career best yards per target this season with Geno Smith, working with the QB who leads the league in completion rate. And he does already have 3 double-digit PPR games this season, including 2 games of 20+.
Yeah, he's been super efficient this season. 71% catch rate, 14.3 yards per catch. So I'm with you with Goodwin in cash on both sides. 4,300 DraftKings, 5,800 FanDuel. He's not like one of my first guys in, but I mean, you need to save salary somewhere, and I think Goodwin makes a lot of sense on both sites. I also like Juju Smith-Schuster for cash on both sides and tournaments, actually. Well, we can get to his ownership on the tournament side, but just $5,800 on DraftKings, 7,300 on FanDuel. He has 19 catches on 21 targets over his last 2 games. And dating further back, he's averaging 8.3 targets over his last 7 full and healthy games. So to me, he's just too cheap for the level of volume he's getting from Patrick Mahomes.
Yeah. I agree that Marquise Goodwin is attractive on FanDuel as well, 5,800 there, but DK Metcalf pops as more of a value on FanDuel by our numbers than he is on DraftKings this week. I think he's certainly attractive, 3rd in our dollars per point on FanDuel, cheapest of the top 5 wide receivers in that particular category. And I mean, I like Marquise Goodwin this week. There's certainly the chance that Marquise Goodwin gets 4 targets and Metcalf gets like 15. So I like him at 8K in cash, certainly in tournaments as well if his ownership projection isn't too high, although I think he's also fadeable if that number does creep up over the weekend.
For sure, and I prefer Metcalf obviously over Goodwin straight up, but it's not easy to fit Metcalf in these lineups on either site really. Back to the DraftKings side, I think DJ Moore is underpriced at $5,500. He has a 23% target share from Sam Darnold over the last 3 weeks. Now he's caught 60% of his targets, averaging 19.6 yards per catch from Darnold over the last 3. And he has a good matchup against the Lions. And then a cheap guy to consider on FanDuel, Darius Slayton at $6,300. 6+ targets in 6 of his last 8 games. Again, we like this game environment indoors against Minnesota, and the Vikings are 31st in adjusted fantasy points allowed to wide receivers.
Yep. Put him and Marquise Goodwin in the same lineup. You got plenty of salary to spend on those other guys. Tournament side, what about that ownership rate for Juju Smith-Schuster you alluded to?
Yeah, 8% on DraftKings, 9% on FanDuel. I don't know. I'm surprised he's not more popular. He was a guy people liked in the summer a lot. He's the Chiefs' number 1 wideout. He's been productive lately. So I'm hoping he stays down there because he's, one of my favorite tournament plays at this point. Jahan Dotson on DraftKings is $3,900. I know the spot is horrible against San Francisco. I don't think the Commanders are going to put up a whole bunch of points, but Dotson has 15 targets over the last 2 games. He's, scored 16 and 23.5 DraftKings points in those games. And I mean, if the Commanders have any chance of moving the ball, I think it's more in the passing game here. I think you could see elevated passing volume if they're playing from behind. So I think Dotson at $3,900 is a nice tournament play that frees up a lot of salary.
I think he's worth considering. I'm not sure I can get myself to playing anything Washington in a format where I really need ceiling this week against San Francisco.
Yeah, I mean, I think you need 15 points out of him to pay off of that salary.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can certainly see the path to him. I wouldn't argue against using him. Checking the ownership on DJ Chark because I know that he's at 2% on DraftKings, 3% on FanDuel. I think that's underplaying him this week. 16% target share this season outside of the negative matchup with the Jets last week. 6+ targets, over 90 yards in 2 straight games before that. I think there's upside to Chark on both sites as a standalone, cheap, low-owned wideout. I think the concern here is you look at the Carolina secondary, and J.C. Horn is easily their best corner. He's moved around the formation this year, though, and there have been a couple games where he even played more in the slot than outside. So he's definitely not a lock to be on DJ Chark for even most of the day. I would guess that they'll at least get him on Amon-Ra St. Brown some, because that's the biggest threat in the Detroit pass offense. So overall, I'm just not downgrading Chark for that individual matchup, and I'm interested because of just how low his ownership rate is here.
Yeah, I think he makes sense because of the price tag, the ownership, and just his profile as a big play guy. I think, it doesn't take a whole lot of volume for him to pay off.
Tight end for cash. I mean, I start on FanDuel because Travis Kelce is just like always atop this board. And it's kind of absurd this week. $145 ahead of TJ Hawkinson in our FanDuel dollars per point, despite costing $2,600 more in FanDuel salary. So, I mean, it's like the two decisions this week are, do I play Derrick Henry? Do I play Travis Kelce?
Yeah, and I'd rather play Henry. I mean, it's tough to build a lineup on FanDuel. I mean, you can't play Henry, McCaffrey, or Jefferson if you play Kelce. So I'm going to end up not playing him in cash. Definitely try to get to him in tournaments because we know the ceiling beats these other tight ends pretty easily. It's tough at tight end on both sites, especially FanDuel. I think TJ Hawkinson makes sense from a safety standpoint, but even he's like $6K, he's not super cheap. I think if you want to go super cheap, I do think Daniel Bellinger, $4,700, like he has 5, 5, and 4 targets in his last 3 healthy games. Like, that's kind of the argument for him at that price tag.
Yeah, well, and the argument is he's in a high upside situation this week where they should be throwing the ball more than they want to. And the other argument is if you look at the other guys in between Hawkinson and Daniel Bellinger, they're all ugly. Like you're not passing over attractive tight end plays to get to Daniel Bellinger. If you're going down from Hawkinson at 6K, I agree. Might as well go all the way down to 4,700. Daniel Bellinger is very similar to the other tight ends right above him.
Yeah, and then on DraftKings, I mean, I want to play Noah Fant. We'll see about the knee thing. He's listed as questionable. Only got in 1 limited practice this week. Pete Carroll did say he fully expects all those questionable guys to play on Saturday. So we'll see if we get any updates on Noah Fant. But if he's a full go, $3,400 in this matchup, with no Tyler Lockett, I think he makes some sense. And if Fant's out, I mean, I think I'd end up going to Will Disley, who is $2,700. I'd almost rather play Disley with no Fant and get those savings.
Yeah, I think Disley is intriguing really either way. $2,700. If Noah Fant's active, then it's certainly just a tournament play, probably still a tournament play in Disley. But the Seahawks tight ends have quietly scored the 4th most PPR points in the league, and they're only behind the Saints because of Taysom Hill's rushing. Without that, they would be 3rd in the league in tight end scoring. You don't notice it as much because it's split between Will Disley and Noah Fant, but the value is there. I can't trust Noah Fant in the lineup, even if he's active this week with that injury, because I don't want to watch him leave my cash lineup early. I think the ownership rate will be high enough on him that he's not going to be sneaky for value in a tournament lineup. So I'd rather lean toward Disley and kind of like cross my fingers that there's no Fant for that one.
Yeah, is that an early game? Is that a 1 o'clocker? I mean, hopefully it is. I mean, we'll know. Yeah, I mean, Fant's only projected for what, 4%, 5% ownership. So I mean, he's on my radar for tournaments too. We'll see if he burns me.
I would expect that number to climb if he's active for the game, because we've spent most of this week he's looking like he's not going to play. Like you said, missing the first 2 days of practice and then 1 limited. Bellinger also in play on DK at 3,300. I think he's a safer play in the 3K range than Hayden Hurst or Noah Fant, who are dealing with injuries. And then if you go up to the 4K range, if you want to stay clear of Travis Kelce, TJ Hawkinson over Dallas Goedert for me among the 4Ks.
Yeah, it's just tough at tight end. There's no one I feel good about for cash at tight end this week. I am going to try to focus on Travis Kelce for tournaments. He's obviously pricey. It's a challenge to fit him in lineups, but he's projected for 14% ownership. I could see him coming in even lower if people are trying to get to Derrick Henry and Justin Jefferson. It's tough to get Kelce in with those guys. So we'll see where he comes in. But I mean, we know he obviously has the highest ceiling. We haven't seen like a huge ceiling game from Kelsey in about a month now. But I think it's still there, especially in this matchup. Seattle has been one of, if not the worst tight end defense for the entire season.
Yeah, and they're without one of their safeties this week, Ryan Neal, which certainly isn't going to help things. Defense, the $2,200 Eagles lead our DK dollars per point. That's intriguing, especially for a tourney lineup. Projected to be one of the higher owned defenses on the week, though. So that might affect it, because I think part of the attractiveness would be getting a good defense at a lower ownership rate than usual, but I don't think we're going to get that.
Yeah, probably not. I do think they're in play for cash, though. I would actually start with the Eagles and cash. The lineup I'm working with now, I have enough money to actually get up to the Cowboys, who I prefer just straight up over Philly. I mean, again, I think Gardner Minshew is a quality quarterback. It's still an upgrade for Dallas's defense facing Minshew, and Dallas is at its cheapest price since week 5. And they're actually second among main slate defenses in DraftKings points per game. So I just think they're too cheap. They make sense if you can get there for cash.
Yeah, they're priced as though they're facing Jalen Hurts this week.
Right.
And Gardner Minshew, we all love him, but he's not Jalen Hurts in terms of his scoring upside. So I agree. Down $1,200 in salary from last week. The first meeting with the Eagles, they did allow plenty of points. It wasn't a great fantasy defense week. They had 4 DK points, I believe, but also sacked Jalen Hurts 4 times in that game. So if they can catch him 4 times, they're probably capable of getting to Gardner Minshew a little bit.
For sure.
If the salary is still there at the end, Baltimore at $3,200 against Desmond Ridder, to me, is a nice mix of upside, not being too expensive and also not being too highly owned by the current projections. So I think if salaries there, go ahead. The 49ers are also projected for lower ownership than they should be against the Commanders. That's going to be a tougher one to get to. We talked about all the expensive guys you want to fit in, but if you can, it can be a differentiator.
Yeah, Baltimore definitely my favorite higher priced defense. And then there are some other gross cheap defenses if you just want to go cheap but not play the chalky Eagles. I think Chicago at bare minimum. I mean, Josh Allen turns the ball over. It's going to be crappy conditions there. I think there's some upside there. Carolina 2,300. I mean, there's talent on that defense. The Lions offense has not been good, or as good on the road this season. And then super gross, though, more leverage off Derrick Henry. Houston's defense, like, if by any chance they get out to a lead and force Malik Willis to have to throw it even like 25 times, like, there's upside. And again, Houston's defense has been playing better lately, so just $2,500 for the Texans.
Man, it's like I'm watching pimples get popped here. On FanDuel, the Niners sit even higher in our dollars per point, 4th there. Still a little pricey to get there with all those high price studs that we're trying to get. Attractive in the 3K range to me over there. The Vikings, $3,600. The Lions, $3,900 against the Panthers because it's Sam Darnold.
Exactly. I agree.
So any other defenses?
That's it for me.
That's going to do it then for this week 16 DFS podcast. Head over to draftsharks.com. Now you can play around with the lineup generator and build your own lineups for playing on DraftKings, FanDuel, and Yahoo this week. You can also find articles from Jared and Kevin highlighting top picks for cash and GPP entries on both sites this weekend. You can find showdown tips articles if you like the DFS showdowns. We'll have those. Had one of those for Thursday night game. We'll have it for the Sunday night and Monday night game as well. Probably not any of the other games on this particular goofy slate. For Jared Small and the rest of the Draft Sharks crew, I'm Matt Schaff saying thanks so much for swimming with us.